associate at Sharps Redmore Acoustics Consultancy. So there's strong drivers on the UK government to try to promote, improve and protect tranquil places, both in rural and urban areas across the country. However, without a way of clearly defining tranquility, this can often pose quite a threat to these valuable places. Over the last 3 years, Clive has been working on exactly that, developing a method to assess and subsequently protect tranquility. During today's webinar, we're going to hear from Clive as he talks about how he's been involved in over 3 years of research and developing expertise in the emerging field of tranquility assessment. So as always, there is space for Q&A session at the end of this webinar, so please do submit your questions in the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen at any point during the webinar, and I'll put these to Clive at the end of the session. So thank you for your attention, and please stand by, this webinar will be starting shortly.
So hello everybody, I'm Clive Bentley. I've been an acoustic consultant for quite a few years now, and a few years ago someone came to me and said, we want to do this thing in a quiet woods, and we're concerned that we might upset the tranquility of the place. How should we go about assessing it? And I didn't really know the answer to that, which is what started all of this. So I'm going to ask everybody here to join in at the beginning. I can get the slide to change. I'm going to ask you all, what is tranquility? What do you think of when you think of a tranquil place? If you close your eyes for a moment and imagine the last time you were somewhere where you think was tranquil, what are you seeing? What are you imagining? What are the things that make it a tranquil place? So you're probably thinking what it looks like, maybe what it sounds like, maybe what it smells like. You're thinking about the information from your senses. But what other things might influence how important that place is for its tranquility? For example, is it somewhere special to you? Is it somewhere that you used to visit as a child? Is it somewhere that is an oasis of calm amongst a busy city where you work, for example? Have a think about it. By all means, type your answers and tell me what you think. When you're looking for a tranquil place, what are you actually looking for? And are those places important to you in your life? And why is it that they're important? What is it that you get from them? Okay, so I can see it says lots of people are typing, but nothing's appearing. Oh, very calm, possibly the sea. Yes. Natural sounds, quiet, natural landscape, green spaces. Yeah, I would agree. Somewhere to avoid other humans. I'll come back to you on that one. I think that's a very interesting point. I always think about avoiding other people, but strangely enough, not everyone does. We'll talk about that later. Equality. Interesting. Okay, so thank you for participating in that, and hopefully that's engaged you a bit. Let's go on with the talk. So why is tranquility important? So really there are a lot of studies that have been done by all sorts of different people, lots of universities, the charity Mind, the mental health charity, and lots of others, to look at why and how being in a natural, quiet, green space is good. It promotes serenity of the mind, it promotes restoration of good mental state, and it's been shown to be particularly beneficial for people with mental health problems such as depression and other situations. Well, that's very poetical. Wind blowing through the trees. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So yes, so it turns out that natural features are very good at evoking a tranquil state of mind because they are, you don't have to concentrate to enjoy them. If you go and watch a football match or a cricket match even, you are to some extent engaged in the thing that you're looking at. So you might have birds singing all around you in a lovely setting, but it doesn't necessarily evoke such a tranquil state of mind because you are engaged in it. The idea with nature is you sort of switch off to the things that normally require your attention. Obviously, because it brings these health and well-being, and especially mental well-being benefits, it has a health benefit for the population as a whole. And somebody somewhere has done a financial assessment of that, which I've got details of in the book that I'm publishing, but I can't remember the details of it at the moment. But it's a surprisingly enormous amount of money that is considered to be associated with the importance of tranquility. As Rihanna said at the beginning, we have a government policy, a planning policy, which says that we should decisions and policies when looking at planning applications should identify and protect areas of tranquility which have remained relatively undisturbed by noise and are prized for their recreational and amenity value for that reason. It's quite a mouthful, that. So basically, relatively undisturbed by noise, doesn't say quiet, not quite the same thing, but it kind of is, and prized for their recreational amenity value. So that's interesting. Somebody said earlier on that the being alone, being away from other people was important, and yet this definition says that it should be prized for its recreational amenity value. So you would expect to find people there, wouldn't you? According to that. Government, having issued that as a policy, then issued a sort of helpful definition in the planning practice guidance, which says that there's no precise rules for assessing how tranquil somewhere is, but it's likely to be relatively undisturbed by noise. Again, it says undisturbed by noise, not quiet, but I think that's what they kind of mean. From human sources, so you can have noise or sound from other sources, but not human ones, that undermine the intrinsic character of the area. It's likely to be perceived to be the natural soundscape is likely to be perceived and enjoyed there, and it's likely to be special for other reasons, which might include its landscape as well. Continuity, not competitive. Thank you, Alice. But the question is, how far does this help us in assessing how tranquil somewhere might be? So I think it's really helpful because it gives us lots of clues. What it doesn't do is it doesn't say it should be below a certain noise level or it should be done in this way. So what we've ended up with is a recognition that tranquility is definitely important, but we don't really know what it is. So the problem is we don't have definitions of what is meant by quiet or undisturbed by sound. We don't have a really clear idea of how we're supposed to protect it. And so my theory with this and my thought on this is that means that any protection is going to be very inconsistent. In some situations, it will be somebody going out and having a look and a listen and just forming their own opinion, like a planning inspector. I've seen planning decisions that have been based on a simple visit that's been carried out by a single inspector. In other cases, it's just ignored. In other cases, it's just taken up because it's just one of many things that people throw at an application because the council wishes to refuse it, and it's a convenient extra thing to throw at it. So I don't think that's a very good idea to have an inconsistent way of applying it. So what I've aimed to do is try and find a consistent, evidence-based, reliable way to enable the identification, protection, and enhancement of tranquil spaces in urban and rural locations. It's not just about protection, it's also about enhancement. So you can find somewhere that's perhaps in a town, you can make it a bit better. I've been involved in a project that's trying to do that at the moment in my hometown of Ipswich. So, yeah. There are other assessment methods. I'll just run through very quickly. Landscape architects, who have historically been the people that have commented on tranquility, they do their landscape and visual impact assessments, but they do it based on kind of experience, but there's no actual specific standard, and it is very much about what it looks like, although they do obviously consider other things as well. CPRE, who are the people that really kick-started all this in terms of government policy, they have a method which is fantastically well researched, and the research from that has been enormously helpful for me developing my method as a spin-off of it, I suppose. It's very, very good, but it's low resolution. It's good for sort of saying how tranquil the UK is, or sorry, England is, or maybe even saying how tranquil, Berkshire or whatever is. But it doesn't tell you, it doesn't really let you drill down into what, how tranquil different areas around a very specific woods might be, and it doesn't take account properly of good sounds like birdsong, water, those kinds of things. University of Bradford, they've done a lot of work on this, again, incredibly helpful work, and I absolutely acknowledge the importance of the stuff they've done in helping me move forwards. But it doesn't take account of the presence of people or of the presence of natural sounds. So, and it also does rely quite heavily on what somewhere looks like. And we've found actually in our research that doesn't make an awful lot of difference, surprisingly. A bit of a contentious thing, but that will be explained in my book if anyone wishes to know more about it. So there are also a few other methodologies that have been put out there, but nothing that really gives you a good high resolution method for looking at how tranquil somewhere is. So what is tranquility? We all know what it is, but it's actually quite difficult to define. The Oxford English Dictionary says it's the quality and state of being tranquil, freedom from disturbance or agitation, serenity, calmness, lots of things that are about states of mind. CPRE has got quality of calm experienced in places mainly natural features free from disturbance and man-made. So again, you've got nature turning up there, man-made nature good, man-made bad. The The common factors when you actually look into all the definitions and working ways that people look at tranquility are lack of noise is important, man-made sound is likely to be bad, natural sound is likely to be good, the natural features and the character of the area are also important. Tranquility experience at a location is likely to result in a tranquiller, more serene state of mind. So those things are common to all the definitions that are out there. It's not simply a low noise level. It's not just a lovely scene. It's the whole thing, the whole set of circumstances that you find yourself in affects how tranquil somewhere appears to be to you and I. There are quantifiable factors, which are things you can measure, such as how loud it is, what it looks like, things that are measurable and definable. But there are other factors which aren't so easy to account for, such as someone's state of mind. If you have a strong sense of attachment to a place, you are likely to automatically view it as better than someone who hasn't got the same attachment to it, probably. We've found a lot of evidence of that when we've gone out and done surveys of members of the public asking them for their opinions. If you're in a place where someone goes regularly, they will always score it higher than someone who's just passing through and who likes it but doesn't care about it in the same way. There's also other things that can affect it, transient effects such as weather, presence of insects or unpleasant smell. There's quite a few humorous stories where our surveyors have gone out into a lovely wild rural location and given it a terrible tranquility score, and we've come back and asked why, and they've said, actually it was next to the sewage treatment works where I was being bitten by midges or something like that. Those things do affect tranquility, and you can't really legislate for that in a way. Also, the presence of people. Somebody earlier on said no people around, and I couldn't agree more. For me to be tranquil, I want to be on my own or perhaps with a loved one, but not with lots of other people. However, there are a lot of studies that have been done by the research branch of the Forestry Commission, I believe, that actually show that an awful lot of people who are city dwellers feel very insecure when they're on their own in rural locations, and they want CCTV or a warden nearby, or just the presence of other people in order to feel that they're not at risk from wild animals or being mugged or whatever it is that they feel at risk from. And therefore actually being alone will reduce their feeling of tranquility. So that was a great surprise for me to learn, but it's true. It's not so much about how many people there are, it's more about what they're doing, I think, that really makes a difference. So if you've got a whole bunch of really quiet people nearby, sort of eating their picnic and behaving all nicely, it's probably not going to affect tranquility that much, whereas if you've got a bunch of hoodlums playing football and shouting and having a great time, it might be nice, but it probably will affect the tranquility. Soft fascination. This was a term that was, I think, first coined by a chap called Kaplan back in the 1980s, who reasoned that if people have, I think originally he put pictures up on a hospital wall, and he found that people who were looking at those pictures rather than a blank wall were recovering better. And he got the idea that it's the idea that you're looking at a view without really having to engage with it, which I spoke about earlier on. And it's that soft fascination which effectively leads to the tranquil state of mind. And the natural environments are a rich source of that. What I have found, or what I believe I have found, is that sound provides an excellent proxy for naturalness in most situations. I think it's a better proxy than any other single sense, and I think the evidence of the statistical breakdown that I've done, where we've collected data about sound and other things, shows that it's got a much higher correlation with people's tranquility scores than anything else. That view needs some justification. I'm not going to go into it anymore, but if you are interested, please do talk to me, and I'll happily tell you more outside of today, because there's a lot of stats and data processing that's led to that belief. Anyway, in order to sort of make that point and to break up the text, how tranquil would you say this place is? It's a view. As you can see, there's some flats on the left. There's a quiet canal. Lots of leafy bits, a little river pathway next to it. I don't know, on a scale of say 1 to 8, where 1 is terribly chaotic, so Oxford Circus on the lead up to Christmas. Oh, thank you, Adam. Yeah, 6 out of 8. And 8 is excellent tranquility, whatever that might mean to you. How tranquil would you say that? 6. So 6, I would say 6 is probably means fairly tranquil. 5, okay, yeah. The houses, it does look a bit grimy, doesn't it? 4, okay, 4. So people, I think 4 is probably not quite tranquil. 5 is probably just tranquil, maybe. That's the way I would look at it anyway. Okay, so it's nice to know people are paying attention and answering that question. Thank you for your answers. So I'm now going to turn the camera around through about 135 degrees, and that's what you're actually looking at. That's taken from exactly the same spot, just not looking in quite the same direction. That's good. What a clever dentist. Adam says 0 for that. On a scale of 1 to 8, it's 0. Good. Well, that's the point, really. Standing there on that bridge, -1, standing there on that bridge, it was immediately obvious, without taking any photographs, that it was not a tranquil place. Actually, you're just underneath the Heathrow flight path here as well. So you actually had, it's in Hillingdon, you actually had aircraft going over as well. So the noise levels were quite high. I would actually have scored this probably a 2. There are worse places. If you imagine the pavement full of people and a busker, for example. Not that I have any IES buskers, but they do make a lot of noise generally, especially in the middle of London. And so you've got this area here, and it's the same place as there, and it shows you how misleading just looking at visual sensors can be, I think. There are loads and loads more examples, but it just gives you an idea. Okay, back to the text. Now I'll skip through these next 2 slides fairly quickly, but they're here in case anyone's interested. How do you measure sound? There's all sorts of different parameters we use when we measure sound, but in general, probably one of the most useful ones is the LAEQ. A means A-weighted, which means you take the raw sound and process it so that it appears in the meter in the same way that human ears respond to sound. EQ means it's the equivalent sound, which is effectively like an average. And the L is the level. So it's the A-weighted human ear response average sound. So effectively, the LAEQ is supposed to be a good measure of how loud we feel somewhere is. The other thing you do with the LAEQ is you measure it over a period of time. In our case, in general, although not necessarily always, we use a 12-hour day between 7 in the morning and 7 at night, 7 in the evening. So the LAEQ is the average A-weighted sound pressure level over a 12-hour day. Apologies to acousticians who will say, well, what about all the other parameters? Should use the L90. Yeah, we could use the L90. We could use the L50. We could use the L max. Some people are using the L max. There are a lot of different other ways of measuring sound, and in fact, there's if you look at soundscapes, there's all sorts of other things that you can talk about as well, like the roughness of the sound and other things like that. And there are a lot of arguments to say that just measuring the LAEQ is not really a very good way of working out how loud somewhere is felt to be, but it's a good starting point. And so that's one of the parameters that we use. So having the LAEQ in our pocket, shall we just find somewhere that's not noisy, so somewhere quiet? We know that most people consider quiet places or places undisturbed by noise are nicer than noisy places. So what is quiet? There's not much out there that tries to define quiet. The Environmental Noise Directive, known as the END, which came in I don't know, 15 years ago or something like that, says a quiet area in an open country shall mean blah, 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 blah. It doesn't really help us. It says undisturbed by traffic, industry, or recreational activities, which is quite interesting because remember the original definition of what an area that should be protected should be valued for its recreational value. So it's a bit odd that it should be have no recreational activities, isn't it? Sounds of running water like a river can be quite tranquil, but relatively high. That's a very good point, and I will come back to that. In fact, that's something I'm working on right now. Anyway, after they published the END, the European Environmental Agency expert panel on noise, blah, 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 that lot, tried to define what was meant by quiet. Excuse me. And they decided there's a level between 30 and 40 LDA. LDA is the same as LAEQ. In fact, it is the same as LAEQ for this. It could be considered a quiet area. But the point is, Birdsong is often on its own above 40 dB. Very, very few locations are actually below 30. You do get some, but you have to really go out into the wilds to find them. Tranquil places are often found in cities, and it's very rare to find an outdoor sound level below 40 in a big city. Almost impossible, I would say, during the day anyway. So being quiet is not just about finding a low measure of sound, it's also about the character and the pattern of occurrence of the sound, I would say. and other things too. So now, just to think about that in a bit more detail, there were things, people have said that things that affect tranquility in a nice way are birdsong, wind rustling in the trees, and the sound of water. And I would say those are the three key things that are good sounds. I'm going to talk about one of those because we haven't got all day. I'll talk about birdsong, which is, I think, a really wonderful one to talk about. So here's a little graph for everybody. It's the LAQ measured every, I think, 15 minutes over a day. It's a little village in Essex. The microphone was tucked away, very, very well sheltered away from any noise sources. So the sounds that we're looking at here are almost entirely birdsong for a 24-hour period. And you can see, I think, that around about 5:30 in the morning was when the sun came up. And that was the dawn chorus, and that's the loudest point of the whole day. It shows you that birdsong it can be quite noisy. We're into the sort of low to mid 50s there during the dawn chorus. During the rest of the day, birdsong varies, and it's really what you're looking at there is a graph of how close a bird was to the microphone, really more than anything else. The birdsong is there. If you were sitting there all day, you would experience noise pretty much only from birdsong between 45 and 50 dB. So as you can see, using 40 dB as a measure would be rather unhelpful. Why is birdsong so good? I saw a little talk on one of these YouTube channels that you get, and I can't remember who it is. He is referenced in my book. A chap was talking about why birdsong was so important, and the theory that he put forward, and I think it's a very attractive one, is that when you are hearing birdsong on a subconscious caveman level, you are feeling relaxed and tranquil because you know that there are no predators nearby. If a wild beast comes to attack you, the birds are going to stop singing and fly away, and you'll take that as a signal on a very subconscious level. So yeah. Birdsong allows you to compete with man-made noise. I don't know if that's true. I've read a lot of stuff about birdsong, and very little that's been written has been. It's usually done, if it's done scientifically at all, it's done by bird people rather than noise people. I think there's a lot of scope for bird people and noise people to work together to actually find out more about this. But they tend to work in isolation, sadly. That may be true, but I don't know. So there's another little side story and a picture to break up the text. So in China, there is a practice called niao, which means carrying a little bird around with you. It was first came up, I think, towards the end of the sort of imperial China, where the rich classes used to carry a bird around as sort of affectation, say, look, I'm rich, I've got a bird and it's mine and it's in a cage. Now, these days, if you go to any public park in China, it's full of people and it's not got any wildlife in it at all, other than these little birds in cages. And what seems to have happened over the last few decades is that men, and it is entirely men, in their sort of 50s, 60s, sort of retired guys, will meet up in parks and smoke heavily and play cards and mahjong and Chinese chess or whatever, and carry a bird around with them. And what the effect of this is that you walk around Chinese park and there's birdsong everywhere. And these little birds are kept, they're chosen for their song. They're not chosen for their looks. They're treasured. They're real treasured possessions. These guys really care for them, although it's debatable whether keeping a bird in a tiny cage is actually caring for it. But it really does make a great deal of difference to how lovely the place feels. Without those birds, all you would hear is traffic noise. And you still do hear a lot of traffic noise. But those birds, they twitter away like mad. And I wish you could hear it. I wish I had a video of it, but I haven't. Okay, so that's just making a point about nice sound and how loud it can be. And so, what other things? What other things are important? So, how much of the sound is natural? How much is man-made? Is it anonymous noise like distant road traffic, or is it something that's got a character which attracts attention? We know that people filter out distant road traffic. I've been on so many sites where I've said to people, walk up to me, what are you doing? I'm assessing tranquility. Oh, yeah. I say to them, have you noticed the road traffic here? And they almost always say, no, I didn't notice that until you pointed it out. But yes, it is quite loud, isn't it? We do. We just ignore those things that are there all the time. So we need to find some way of dealing with it. So I've come up with, we've got the LAEQ, which I mentioned earlier on. We've also got 3 other parameters. One which I'm calling the LX, and apologies to Martin and anyone else that knows about acoustics. I'm going to just say that it's called LX for the moment. I'm still finalising what it is, but it's basically it's a measure of road, rail, and other sources such as aircraft and now even boats which has the potential to affect our perceptions, but which actually, because they're there all the time, or because they're there intermittently, you can't measure them in the same way as, I don't know, people playing near you and so on. So it's a measure. It needs some corrections, and again, that's described in detail in the book. But it's just a measure of transportation noise you can think of for the time being. The PONS, which stands for percentage of time when you can only hear natural sounds. And the NAMM, which is a number between 1 and 5, which represents the balance between natural and man-made sounds. The LX, I just mentioned about that. Basically, what happens is that people will almost always filter out, unless you're in a really highly rural environment where any sound from road traffic is kind of annoying. Generally speaking, if you're in a park or anywhere like that, people will kind of not notice road traffic noise up until around about 50 dB. Then there's a sort of bit of a grey area between 50 and 58, and above 58, people then respond to the road traffic's quite annoying. So it's not a linear thing. It's not at 40 they're this annoyed, at 50 they're that annoyed, at 60 they're and so on. It's a curve rather than a linear thing. So so I measure that separately as the LX parameter. I then add in aircraft, rail, and canal and pleasure boats as well. They all need corrections applied to them, and it's a bit complex. But again, read the book if you're interested. But basically, it takes out all of those transportation sources from the rest of the assessment. A few more pictures. Here is the approach to Blackwall Tunnel in South London. There's a lot of road traffic noise here. You can see the vehicles in front of you. The most of the noise actually comes from the flyover, because the vehicles on that are doing about 60, 70 miles an hour, I think, and they're quite noisy. So here you've got noise levels probably in the high 60s, road traffic noise, continuous. Here, little park in Needham Lake in Suffolk. Very beautiful, very peaceful, very quiet, and occasionally intercity thunders past. Now the intercity and other trains are probably there for about 5% of the time. So 95% of the time, all you can hear here is birdsong, and it's beautiful and it's lovely. And then the train goes shooting past at very high noise levels. On average, the LAEQ for a day will be about the same as there, but we don't perceive it in the same way. Here, Norfolk Broads. Little boat going past. I actually had encountered one period where it got all clogged with boats. And they're actually quite noisy, these things, because they take a long time to go past because they go very slowly. So in terms of the noise level that they produce, we actually had one period where the noise level was getting towards the high 60s from little canal boats. But we didn't, again, I would say we don't respond to that in quite the same way that we would respond to that. Anyway, just to illustrate the point. Eddie said, where is the 58 dB from? That's just, it's not a fixed figure. It's just that we have found from the research and the measurements that we've taken that seems to be about the level where the curve turns upwards. I understand. No, it's not from the WHO. Although it does coincide quite closely, doesn't it? The WHO recommends that levels below 50 aren't too bad, and levels above 55 will be quite good. Yes, this will be published, I think. You'll have to ask Rihanna about that. So moving swiftly on, aware of the time. So ponds, there's the definition of ponds. We classify silence as a natural sound. I did come across a situation in a courtyard in Cambridge where I was measuring, and there was virtually no sound at all. You could hear some distant traffic just about, but there was just no sound. And I thought, well, how do I classify that? There's no natural sound, and there's no man-made sound. So, but I think basically you classify silence as a natural sound because it seems to work that way, and the evidence that we've got supports that. So, and also, of course, if you've got very high noise levels from road traffic and things like that, NAMMs and ponds fall away because it's all about the overall level when you get up to higher levels. So I'm skipping through this a bit quickly, but NAMM, natural man-made sound balance. Well, just quickly move on to the next table to show you how that works. So the parameters are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 is all or virtually all sound is from man-made sources. 5 is all or virtually all sound is from natural sources. 3 is a sort of equal balance. You might get that, say, in an urban park, maybe. 5 you might get out in a beautiful wilderness area. 1 you probably get in the middle of any city, when it's a shopping centre or somewhere like that. And then we've got the tranquility scoring. this score, it was inspired by 4 to 8 on the score was inspired by the work that was done by Greg Watts and others at the University of Bradford. They kind of put together a scoring system which was a 5-point score with number 1 being not tranquil, just simply not tranquil. So it incorporated all of my scores 1 to 4, and then they used pretty much almost exactly the same words as the rest of there. And we found that was a very useful way of doing it. We wanted to extend it down into untranquil areas, and those are the things that we came up with after a good deal of thought. And those are the scores that we give people, give places. So what we've done is we've gone out, we've surveyed, we visited around about just under 2,000 locations now, I think it is, at 40 sites. There's more than 40 now. It's expanding by the day. We make measurements of the 4 parameters and a lot of other data collected as well. We've done a lot of panoramic photographs of sites. When we thought that what somewhere looked like was going to be very important, and as I say, it turned out it wasn't. And we also recorded a lot of other things, like, for example, were we getting bitten by insects, or is there somewhere nice to sit? Because that can influence how tranquil somewhere feels as well. If it's a sort of muddy, sort of nettle-strewn path, it's not as nice as one with a lovely dry bench. And then, of course, alongside of these, I think it's about 25 or more people have actually carried out the survey work, all trained to do it the same way. We found people would score their own tranquility scores. Also, alongside this, we did questionnaire surveys with members of the public. We asked them how they would score the tranquility there. We also asked them where they come from and how often they visited it and things like that. It's very simple questions, just to get an idea of whether they were regular users or someone that's come from a long way or just passing through. That was quite useful. We learned an awful lot from that. That's where we really learned to understand that how people's attachment really affects their scores. We also found that people that appeared to be grumpy would always give a worse score. I mean, that's just pretty unscientific assessment of how grumpy someone once was, but you can sort of tell when you ask a lot of people. Yeah, that was all very useful. We basically threw all of that data into an enormous spreadsheet. And we processed it using linear regression, multivariable linear regression, which I suspect most people who are watching this will have done at some point or other. And we found that the numbers were quite good, actually, but they weren't quite good enough. We were getting residuals that were not evenly balanced across the range. And I consulted with a couple of acousticians who I know, and it turns out that tranquility, fairly obviously, once it's pointed out, is not it's not an ordinal scale. So you can't have, say, a tranquility score of 2 is twice as good as a tranquility score of 1, and a tranquility score of 4 and 8 are then twice as good, and so on. So you think of tranquility scores 1 to 8 more as perhaps colours or different breeds of dog or whatever. They are just different things rather than ordered in a scale. So knowing that, we then took all the numbers and rejigged it, and we used multinomial logistic regression, which I didn't know existed until I started doing this, and that seems to give us the right answers. And what we then get is for each, we put in each of the 4 parameter scores, and it then does a bit of processing and tells us what the likelihood is of an average person saying that each one of those 8 possible scores would be selected. So you get a curve effectively of how likely it is that each of the scores would be selected as the like a dose response curve. Yeah, kind of, not really. It's a probability. It's a relative probability. So you might put in a score of a NAMM score of 5, so it's beautifully natural. A PON score of, I don't know, 95, because basically it's all natural sound for almost all the time, but occasionally someone walks past. You might have a road traffic noise score of, say, I don't know, 20 or something, because there's no, somewhere in the vague distance, when it goes very, very quiet, you can just about hear the road. And you might have a sort of an AQ score of, I don't know, say 45, because there's lots of birds singing. And you put those numbers in, and it says, with those numbers, the most likely tranquil score is, with a score of 10.5, is excellent tranquility. But then the score of, 8.3, it might only be good tranquility, and then the curve drops down below that to the chances of someone scoring that place as chaotic and noisy or whatever is very, very low, and so on. So it does that for each different possible
set of variables that you put in, and it's pretty good. We found that a reliable prediction can be made across a whole range of scores. We found that people who will always overscore their familiar places. Also, very interesting, we found that people who have travelled a long way will often overscore somewhere as well. And that's something which I think is accounted for by confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance. I spoke to a psychologist about this, and basically if you've invested a lot to get somewhere or to be somewhere or to join something, you will always automatically see it as better than you would have done if you didn't have to invest a lot to get into it. There's a fascinating little aside in my book where I talk about this a little bit, but it's genuinely true. People basically ignore things that don't agree with what they think they already know, and if they've been somewhere, travelled somewhere a long way to get there, they will value it more highly than someone that lives on the doorstep, necessarily. So got some unusual results. Somebody asked earlier on, what about where you've got very high noise levels from a natural thing? And you're absolutely right. Where you've got a waterfall, at the moment the method isn't quite working. It thinks, yeah, it's excellent, it's excellent, it's excellent, and when it gets to a certain point, it flips from saying yes, it's excellent, and it goes, hang on a minute, no, it's not, it's terrible. And that's because I haven't measured enough sites where there are waterfalls and that kind of thing. And I'm in the process of rectifying that, and I'm hoping that will teach the method effectively, because once we've got that, we're going to have to rerun all the statistics on everything, and then hopefully it will have learnt what the true score should be next to waterfall. And it is indeed possible that when you get really close to waterfall, it doesn't feel so tranquil because it just is too noisy. I don't know. I'm filling in data gaps on this all the time, but that is an unresolved issue at the moment. So the residuals now, this is a plot of the difference between the observed and predicted scores from the 1,800 or so sites. And as you can see, the zero score is that basically what we predicted it should be, according to those parameters, actually matched the observations of members of the public and of our surveyors. And that's happening about 62% of the time, which I think is pretty good. And we're no more than one out about 35% of the time, and there's no systematic error one way or the other. It's very rarely more than 2 out, and we have actually had 1 or 2 where it's been 3 out. Those ones where it's actually we've been 3 out, that's usually where someone's getting bitten by midges or some other weird localized effect is occurring. But you know, those things do happen, and they can occasionally be wrong. So, but generally speaking, it's a pretty reliable method, I think. Just for interest's sake, what we're looking at here is all the different scores that we can give it, from 8 down to 1, and the sound level that we recorded in each case. And as you can see, if we start with chaotic, frantic, and harsh, Trafalgar Square in the week before Christmas with buskers going like clappers, that's a real big one. That's the sort of situation you look at that, and it's all about sound level there. It doesn't really matter. The other factors hardly have any impact on the perception. Same thing with busy and noisy and unsettled and busy. As you can see, there's a bit of overlap between them. But when you get down to not quite tranquil and below, or above, I should say, I suppose, it's not really about noise level so much. That's where the NAMM and the ponds really make a big difference. So I don't know. I think that's quite an interesting graph. That someone's just submitted a war and peace question. I'll have to pick that up at the end, and perhaps Rihanna can explain it to me. So how do we output this? How does it come out? It comes out as a map. CPRE pioneered this with their tranquility maps, which have been fantastic tools for encouraging politicians in particular to recognise the importance of tranquility. And I think those maps have been a really important campaigning tool which has led eventually to the government deciding that protection of tranquility should be a policy goal. And I like the way they do it, but we need high resolution maps. So we've designed a way of mapping which we think works. Say I, and they need to work in urban places as well as rural locations. So here we go. We've got 3 case studies, and then I'm done. I'll do them quick as possible. So case study 1, Christchurch Park, Ipswich. There it is. If anyone wants to look at this later, they can. But there's a terribly badly labelled map of Christchurch Park. As you can see, there's a round pond here. There's lots of cut-throughs from this side of town to that side of town. Down here at the bottom in Crown Street, there's the There's a bus station and a very busy road. Fonera Road here is fairly busy. You've got a footpath going through the middle of the park there with some formal gardens and a bandstand. You've got kiosks, ice cream kiosks. You've got Christchurch Mansion. You've got children's play area here. And up, this is the high end of the park. This is where, generally over here, is where the sports teams will play and kids will kick footballs around and things like that. And dog walkers run their dogs around all this area here. It's quite a sloping park. As I say, this bottom area is much more busy than the rest of it. And up this side here, you've got some tennis courts, which actually quite peaceful, really. They're not that noisy, but they're always in the summer people playing on them. Here's an example of the map, which is all the wrong colours, because for some reason, I don't know. Well, roughly the right colours, but it gives you an idea. So basically, this area here, this big green area, is fairly tranquil. Road traffic noise throughout the park. We've got a little tiny area here, which is actually quite well shielded, which is actually just about classified as good. And you've got this area which is not quite tranquil, and that's mainly because of the people that are using it. Down here, you've got quite a lot of road traffic noise and people cutting through the park and so on. So it gets to the stage where it's not quite tranquil. Sorry, I should have said this is just tranquil. This area here is the children's play area. And of course, there's a road going up here affecting that edge. This varies to some degree between summer and winter, but it varies more depending on day of the week. This is roughly a June weekday, so it's quite busy, but it's not as busy as it will be once the schools go out. In the summer, that gets a lot less tranquil. And obviously, if you go there on a really quiet day in spring or something, it'll be a bit better. It's surprising how little it changes due to seasons, actually. Next case study, really quickly, Phoenix Gardens here in London. This is just outside of the West End. It describes itself as a tranquil oasis. People interviewed there say, I've come here because it's peaceful and quiet and lovely. I visited there in November. As you can see, it's a bit raggedy, but quite nice. Another picture of it there from a different angle, and you can see it's down a little alleyway. The road, you have got road traffic noise, you have got construction noise there, but it's at the end of a little alleyway, so it's a little bit removed from the West End. This is a map of the area. The big line going up and down here is Shaftesbury Avenue. This is Seven Dials. This little red area here is where there was some roadworks going on. They're digging up and pneumatic drill here. That's Denmark Street there. I can't remember the name of this. It's Foyle's Bookshop. What's it called? Maybe someone can tell me. And the little yellow lines there are where taxi drivers take a little cut through from time to time. Pretty much no one else drives up through there apart from the odd taxi driver. As you can see, some of the sound from the road is sort of bleeding to some extent down these little alleyways. This is the alleyway we were looking at earlier on there. So this area here is Phoenix Gardens. This is actually an adjacent sort of churchyard. This is a church here, and this is just a sort of a well-screened churchyard. So the whole area, relatively speaking, is incredibly important for its tranquility. Although the actual score I've given it is not quite tranquil, which is that's what it is. But relative to everywhere else, it's quite important. So I think that shows how it can possibly be used in town situations. Next example, Stonehenge. This is the last example. I'm nearly done. Stonehenge. There used to be two roads running past Stonehenge. One along the left here, and the other one just out of camera sight over on the right. They closed the one on the left, and I think it really improved. Denmark Street was the one up north, old chap. It's the one on the west. I can't remember the name of, but yeah, you're right area. And they closed the road over to the left here, and they want to close the one on the right. There's enormous congestion problems on the one on the right, the A303. You can't drive past Stonehenge on a summer day at any point without it takes an hour to drive past. It's mad. And they want to close it for all sorts of traffic reasons. And also Stonehenge, what I've said, it will bring tranquility at Stonehenge. And that's one of the reasons that it's being considered. But there are people who are opposing it, who say that if they do close the A303, they're going to put a tunnel under Stonehenge. And Stonehenge is not just the henge that you're looking at there; it's actually a whole wide area that's full of really important archaeology. And people say that this tunnel apparently would affect the archaeology, obviously adversely. So I went along to try and find out. This is another view of Stonehenge, which is taken from a bit closer to the stones. And as you can see, there's a lot of people there compressed into a small area. And I found actually that the tranquility at the stones is not affected by the road at all. It's affected entirely by, is there a group of school children near you or not? And here's my little tranquility map. Sorry, there isn't a key on this. These are all a bit work in progress, some of these. But so there's the A303 here. Very, very busy, very, very noisy. And you go away from it, the contours from the road drop off, and then the thing that takes over as the thing that affects tranquility is the people walking around you. They're all marshaled into this area here, The photograph I showed you earlier on, this photograph here, is taken just here, looking that way, and really, this yellow colour means unsettled and slightly busy, and that it was unsettled and slightly busy, and it was entirely down to people. And I have done some more maps, but I haven't put them in here, where I've taken the road out of the equation and seen how much difference that makes, and it's virtually none. I've also tried some other things out, like, for example, removing the people, or saying, let's have a silent day or a silent hour, where everyone agrees that they'll go there, and they won't shout, and they won't use the little audio guides that they play very loudly in your ear as you walk around in 18 different languages. And I've seen how much difference that would make, and that would actually make a much more convincing difference to the site. Again, see my book for more details. But it's a really interesting study. I'm not on anyone's side in this, but it was interesting to have a look at it. Why don't like climbing Ben Nevis? Yes, I'd love to go and study that. Yeah, a bit too hard for me to climb it probably. I need someone to carry me up there. So yes, so that's it, finished. I say it's a valuable resource, it needs to be protected, and the scientific assessment is the key to enabling this to be done consistently. And I therefore hope that my method, or one that's similar to it, will be in use soon. So I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Clive. That was really interesting. Yeah, make sure we consider what you actually consider to be tranquil. I'm with many though, and think that the lack of people is definitely a nicer space.
Yeah.
There were a couple of questions that came in that you either touched on loosely or didn't get the chance to get around to. Martin, going back to more about how you assess tranquility, said, would you look at using L90 and L10 as objective measures?
I would. If I started again now from scratch, I think the one that I might use rather than LEQ might be L50, actually, which is a very rarely used parameter, as I think it might be more helpful. I can't, because I've got all the data now from all the sites. I did start by collecting the L90 and the LEQ and the Lmax. I think I also got the L10 in most cases and the Lmin. But I only started, I only then, after a year or so, I decided that LAQ was giving me the right answers, or giving me some, some consistent answers. Also, it was in line with the other work that had been done by the University of Bradford, who felt the LEQ was useful. So I stuck with that. I kind of regret it now, and if I was starting again now, I might use a different parameter. The L10 I don't think would be all that helpful unless I'm looking at road traffic alone. So yeah, I think I would stick with that.
Okay. A different question that came in from Cheryl Miles, which was halfway through. She said, when you're looking at scoring tranquility, do you take into account someone's starting point, i.e. somebody who lives in quite a rural area will pick up on different things or be more sensitive to things as opposed to someone who lives in a town? And additionally, someone's hearing at a different stage in their life or due to disability may change. Are either of these things considered?
They are. I mean, the truth is, there is no one method which will tell you exactly what a person will feel. What I'm trying to do is give you provide a method which will allow us to say what a typical person would feel. And of course, a typical person may be someone that wouldn't include someone that has a strong disability, perhaps, and it wouldn't include someone that has acute perception as well. Absolutely, people who live or work in a town or city will have a much lower expectation of how tranquil somewhere needs to be in order for them to find what they need when they're looking for tranquility than someone in the country. And I totally agree that people that live in the country and work in the country, and they're going to look for a much higher standard than people who live and work in the city. But so far, I think this method seems to hold up. When we've talked to people in the range of different locations that we find our results do fairly well match it, especially when you take into consideration confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance, which obviously is always going to play a part. So yeah, it seems to be it's consistent enough. It's never going to be perfect because at the end of the day, tranquility is a state of mind, and you can't predict what someone's state of mind is going to be. All you can do is predict what it's likely to be. That's it.
Yeah, and very subjective, I can imagine. Another question we've got in is from Robert Ashcroft, and he says, is what constitutes a natural sound ever contested? So presumably, this could depend on differing baselines or definitions of natural. For example, many London parks are now very heavily populated by ringneck parakeets, which are an invasive species and can be very loud. Are there different views to this sort of noise?
Yeah, most definitely there's different views. I mean, I did a really interesting case a few years back where people were being disturbed by noise from exactly that kind of bird, which someone was keeping hundreds of them in their garden or in their sheds in their garden. And people were saying, hey, it's a terrible sound, it wakes me up. And actually go and measure it, it's about the same level of sound as the other birds. But because it was an alien sound, it was standing out to people and they were noticing it. So yeah, that's a very valid point. I mean, there's always going to be exceptions to this rule. One thing we have done, which I haven't explained at all in this talk, but we've gone to a lot of trouble to do, is make sure that the assessment of NAMM and ponds has been done in a repeatable way, because they are effectively kind of pseudo-subjective, or you could say they are completely subjective. They're not really, but we've made sure that with all the surveyors that we've used, that they are giving the same scores of NAMM and ponds in every situation. People can have different opinions about how tranquil somewhere is, but they can't have different opinions about the relative balance of natural and man-made sounds, or is an incorrect opinion. And we have actually found a couple of people who were a bit off kilter, and we've taken them out of our sample. So again, yeah, it's a good point. It's not infallible. There probably are better ways of doing it, but it's the best I've come up with so far.
Okay. Another one about measuring tranquility again is from Ria Monkton. She says, have you assessed tranquility as part of an impact assessment? And if so, how did the results go?
I did. It was still sort of a bit in its embryonic stages. I did it for Dormill Colliery, a disused colliery in North Warwickshire. That case went to a planning inquiry in January 2017. No, February 2017. The judgment was issued a month or so ago, and the Secretary of State and the planning inspector said, "Thank you very much, Clive Bentley. Your assessment was jolly interesting, but it hasn't been peer reviewed, it hasn't been published, it hasn't got any real status, so we're going to dismiss it and ignore it." The inspector then went out to site and reached exactly the same conclusions as I had reached, and used those as the basis for refusing it on the basis of tranquility. So on the one hand, I was utterly unsuccessful and totally dismissed. On the other hand, if I hadn't given the evidence that I'd given, I think there's little or no chance that tranquility would have been an issue. And the fact that the inspector came to the same conclusion as I did, exactly, and for the same reasons, was very encouraging to me. Yeah.
Okay. Martin, who has a background in this area, has said a couple of comments really. He said, good work and groundbreaking. How about a modified hybrid method which combines both subjective and objective measures, a similar approach to assess human response to sound with respect to annoyance or disturbance, but tranquility in this case?
That's exactly what this is. We've got objective measurements of LAEQ and of road, rail, etc., etc. And then we also have the NAMM and the ponds, which are debatably, well, in fact, the ponds isn't subjective, it's factual, and we've done some measurements of what people thought it was, and then actually measured it and actually worked out what the exact percentage was, and we found that people are really good at making an estimate of how much of the time you can only hear natural sounds. Yeah, I think that's what this is. This isn't me sitting in a room thinking, what parameters can I use? Okay, I'll go and use them. These parameters have evolved in the first year of the work from nothing to something which works. And some of the parameters we started with, like how much of the area is natural contextual features to look at, or for example, population density, or if you can call it population density, how many people are there around you? Those were also recorded but dropped. So what we've ended up with it's been the hybrid that seems to work.
Okay, great. And a little bit of a reference point, I think it was slide 22 you were referring to. Eddie has just said, is the 58 decibels discussed earlier a threshold of annoyance for road traffic published anywhere?
No, not specifically, but...
Is there any way you can direct him to?
Yeah, I can direct you to this isn't really quite the same thing, because annoyance and tranquility are not the same thing, but there is a very good, I'm trying to find it on my other laptop at the moment, there's a very good document which I expect most people in acoustics might be aware of, but I must admit I hadn't read it properly until I came to do this. called, give me a second, Possible Options for the Identification of SOAL and LOAL in Support of the NPSE. It's published by, written by ACOM, published by DEFRA in January 2013. If anybody wants to know more about that, give me a call or send me an email or something, and I'll tell you more about it. But that does suggest some values for sols and lowels for road traffic and rail traffic, and that suggests for annoyance the lowell for road traffic should be 56. So similar sort of number. My 58 hasn't been taken from a reference document. It's been taken from my own research, but it does seem to match fairly well with the other published stuff that's out there.
Okay, great. And I will publish that reference with the webinar, so you can find that. That is it in terms of questions that have come in, unless anyone's got a last minute one that they'd like to submit. But while we wait for any particular ones to come in, I just want to say thank you for coming in and presenting on that. It's really exciting. A couple of people have asked when the book might come out.
Well, we're hoping, I keep saying this, we're hoping to publish in autumn. I was originally hoping to publish this spring, but the fact that I still would have sought out a few little wrinkles in it has meant that it keeps getting put back and put back. It's essentially written, but the gap, because I've got a few little bits to sort out, I don't want to publish it until it's quite ready. So hopefully autumn, let's say that. Okay,
so watch this space for the autumn time, and I'm sure the IES will do something to support that as well. So just for those attendees that have registered to listen today, make sure you record it as CPD on your IES CPD tool on the members area. If you've got any questions, do get in touch with the project office, we can help you. Our next webinar will be on Robot Smart Labs. It's an innovative approach for monitoring and managing rivers and lakes beyond 2020. And that will be by Natalie Gilbert from 10 to 21 on the 26th of June. So do make sure you log in for that if you're interested. This will be recorded and made available on our YouTube channel and on the IES website. So do go back and have another listen if you want to, and contact Clive through that. But yeah, thank you very much for those that listened and tuned in, and thank you very much to Clive.
Thank you.